my bones couldn't take it. So I was like, nope, time to get out. So Ryan, where are you based?
Also Michigan, yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
You guys must love the snow.
Oh, it's great. Hey, I'm getting a live stream up. I started recording just to give you a heads up. I'm going to send the link over to two.
Awesome.
Who will publish it. Oh man, there we go. And then I'm going to also post the live stream on LinkedIn, and we'll be good to go. So thanks for your patience, everybody, for waiting for us to kick this off.
And as we get started, everyone knows, or most people know, that I'm a big Apple fanboy, but I just got these AirPod Pros and they fall out of my ears all the time. Then they suck. So if you see me doing this, I'm pushing it back on my ear.
You know what? They do the same for me, and I cannot wear them. It's the only Apple product I can endorse.
I'm right there with you. I got every other one, and this one is failing, unfortunately.
Yep. Cool. Well, it looks like we have a good amount of people on. It's 1:02, so thanks for being patient with us kicking this off. This is our first roundtable that we've done here at Blumira, and so I have actually a slide so I can introduce you two properly, and what we're going to talk about. So I got really super creative. Actually, two did this for us, so thank you two. Oh, look at that, security advisor series, right? And we're doing this on a weekly basis with lots of different people. Today we're going to be talking about CMMC compliance, which is very pertinent to federal contractors and people working with the federal government. And on today we have Sean Frazier. Welcome, Sean. Advisory CISO for Duo Security.
Thanks, Patrick. Good to be here.
Awesome. And give us a little bit of your background as it pertains to the federal government and IT security.
Oh gosh, we're just talking about this. So I grew up in DC, spent a lot of time with federal government agencies over the last 25 years, and I have the gray beard to prove the 25 years. Mostly around kind of service delivery around applications, specifically like cloud and internet. So I worked at a little company called Netscape where we did some internet stuff with the federal government back in the day. And that's kind of how I ended up in California now which is exactly where you want to be when you support the federal government. You want to be exactly 3,000 miles away from them. So I'm based in San Francisco.
Cool. And then Ryan Bonner, you join us. You're a consultant. I probably should put your company up there. It's something cert.
Cert? Yeah.
All right, cool. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, so I primarily work as a compliance consultant, focusing on DFARS, regulations for safeguarding of controlled unclassified information, and then everyone is obviously gearing up for CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. So doing a lot of work in those spaces. I also volunteer on the CMMC accreditation body's industry standards working group. So that keeps me busy for sure, and tracking a lot of these topics as we kind of go through this whole industry-wide rollout. Cool.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and it's been great interacting and hearing about how you're working with these contractors and the framework itself. So happy to have you on. I'm Patrick Garrity, VP of Operations at Blumira. Worked at Duo for about 8 years prior and helped with like FedRAMP stuff and a lot of stuff as it pertained to NIST 800, 171 and all those other great controls. I won't claim to be the expert on this call, but yeah, I'm more or less here to learn and facilitate discussion. So thanks for taking the time today to join and talk about CMMC. So no more slides for now. No more slides. Promise.
So I think Ryan's the expert on the call, right? So Ryan's going to answer all the hard questions, I think. So just so everyone's aware.
Well, cool. there's a lot of back and forth there because there's no such thing as an expert in CMMC yet. So
yeah, I know.
We'll do our best. We'll reduce the.
I'll be the guy giving the color commentary on. Wow, we're moving so quickly. Woo! So that's me.
Yeah. Sweet. So I launched. We're gonna have some polls. We're gonna have Q&A and comments. Please ask anything during the discussion. The first one is more or less what your role is as it relates to CMMC. And apparently I'm not good at writing really good roles because most people are other on this call. So if you want to put your other in the comments so we can talk about what those are. But it does look like we have 19% CMMC consulting, 2%, or I'm sorry, 11% federal contractors, and then 72% are something else. So sorry for my terrible questions. What do you think everybody else is on this call? Any guesses?
Well, yeah, there's sometimes there's a distinction between a federal contractor and a defense contractor. So you might see a few people in that bucket. A lot of technology providers and third-party service providers are tracking these topics. So yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag.
Well, and plus us in federal tend to play things close to the vest, so they might not just want to tell you who they are.
Well, and that's the other thing I noticed is nobody's saying comments. Nobody's putting anything in the comments, so nobody wants to tell us what other. Someone did say technology provider, right? So
there you
go. Cool.
Keep it vague.
Yeah, that's awesome. So hey, let's hop in a little bit into CMMC for everyone on here. First off, what is CMMC and how does it pertain to organizations today?
That's a good one.
We'll let you take that one, Ryan.
Ryan's
you
going
get
to
the
take
next
that
one,
one.
Sean.
So here's how I would describe CMMC. It's not a brand new thing. It's really just the culmination of the DoD's efforts to do something about exfiltration of intellectual property out of the US to other nation states. So this whole effort really started back in 2011 with things like basic safeguarding requirements for federal contractors. And then it really took some big steps in 2016 when we saw the introduction of the DFARS contract clauses and some technical guidance. We would call it NIST SP 800-171. So that was all baked into contract awards as sort of a self-attestation model. So really CMMC is kind of this next step in making those requirements a reality, transforming those prior self-attested requirements into an accessible and certifiable model.
Yeah, I think Ryan's exactly right. The one thing I'll add is that DFARS and 171 were all kind of thou should do this, right? And CMMC is more thou must do this, right? So it's leveraging a lot of the things that already existed. I mean, it's right in the name. It tells you exactly what it's going to do, right? It's a security model, it is a maturity model, and it's a certification. So it's going to follow in the footsteps of FedRAMP and other things, which is going to require validation of the things that you should have been doing for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think one thing to mention here is I think CMMC, it's like, oh man, another thing, NIST, all these things, right? I think the aspect of intention sometimes gets forgotten when you're marching towards compliance as well, which is well, the whole purpose is trying to keep the supply chain in the federal government secure, right? Which is essentially why they're putting these things in place, because everyone should have common controls in the security program, right?
Well, I think, and I think that, we live in a world where we're all interconnected now. So over time, this has gotten better or worse, depending how you look at it, right? We're all living in the same neighborhood. So we all have to make sure that the people we're dealing with and we're connecting up and the people who are dealing with our data are applying the same level of controls and the same level of due diligence on protection that we would do ourselves.
Yeah, I think that you see people understand the concepts of trust and safeguarding, if they've been in defense contracting for a really long time, but it's usually on non-digital concepts. So, you ask about, physical security. Oh yeah, we've got the original Mylar prints from the 1970s in a safe, behind 3 layers of steel and all these great things. They get that part of it. But once the digital transformation started to happen, over the last several decades, the trust aspect of it was kind of a foreign concept. So trying to reintroduce that into the supply chain is I think the current challenge.
Yeah, one thing where this started was interesting was, really kind of started with 853, right? 853 is the godfather of all controls. And it used to be that you'd go in and talk to a government agency and they would drop 53 in front of you and say, comply with that. And you'd leaf through it and you'd say, well, fire suppression, I don't do anything with fire suppression, right? Because it was like every control, every protection, physical and otherwise. So this is kind of the whittling down and the focusing on what matters.
Cool. Hey, and the question, who does it actually pertain to, right? So when we're talking about people working with the federal government, right, is it only defense or is it other aspects of the federal government as well where this is pertaining?
Yeah, this is one of those areas where we're starting to see a rapid expansion of the way that CMMC is being viewed or potentially adopted. So, it's really a patchwork implementation right now because the way CMMC is anticipated to work is that, you know, it's basically included on a contract by contract basis. So these are, in some cases, decisions that come down to the individual contracting officer or award. So if you think of like an old Western, you know, where you travel from town to town and each sheriff looks at something differently, you know, the individual contracting functions could potentially choose to include or not include CMMC once that's an available option. But we've seen some really compelling examples in the last few weeks. You know, some GSA contracts that are not defense related coming out and talking about CMMC. We've seen some DoD related contracts coming out of some of the early pilots that would also require CMMC to be, you know, specified or in some way included in future awards. So it's starting to move beyond defense into the federal space. Probably some commercial considerations coming down the line as well.
And I think the building blocks are all kind of consistent, right? And Ryan can certainly chime in on this, but you're looking at kind of the 171 controls. There are things like, and things that we love and near and dear to our heart, right? It's protection of data. It is you know, multi-factor authentication, protection of users. It's endpoint. It's, hey, can the endpoint meet this level of trust or protection as it's accessing data? So these are all building blocks that have been around for a while. So it makes sense that everyone's going to be looking at this.
Hey,
Yeah.
so it sounds like it's like basically it's happening at a contract level, right? And people are like, yeah, these are just good practices in general. Who's actually enforcing it, right? Because I can check a box and say, yes, we'll do this, right? But who's holding the accountability on that side?
Yeah, that's another area where enforcement, I think, starts to look different than a lot of organizations might think. I think when we look at other functions of enforcement in the safeguarding space, like let's say the way the State Department handles export controls, you imagine like this team of people investigating violations of certain rules, or, you know, traveling from contractor to contractor to poke and prod and ask questions. This is really a contract mechanism. So as far as who enforces it, those individual contracting officers can specify a certain CMMC level. And if you're somebody who wants to bid on that particular opportunity, you've got until award date to go get that certification. Otherwise, they won't be able to give you that award. So, you know, it's all about the adoption rate. There won't be a flip of the switch and then suddenly CMMC is a reality for everyone. It'll be a staged approach.
Yeah, and it's a lot like where we went through with FedRAMP. In the beginning, FedRAMP was kind of you know, everyone kind of did, you know, you had FSMA evaluations, and FSMA was kind of like 53, where FSMA was just this gargantuan thing that people had to look at, and FedRAMP streamlined that for cloud services. And I think CMMC is kind of following the same, you know, path, where it will, you know, right now we're just picking the evaluators. The evaluators will evaluate folks at the certain maturity levels. They're going to be the ones that are going to hold the vendor's feet to the fire on kind of where they sit in the CMMC stack. And then, as Ryan points out, this is all kind of tied into procurement, right? So it's the carrot and the stick, right? If you want something to the federal government, you've got to do this. So it really is the carrot and stick approach.
Cool. We have a question. And this one's a pretty, I don't know what NFO controls are, but you probably do, Ryan. Will the NFO controls from 800 to 171, right? And that's the NIST, more or less contractor guidelines, eventually be included within CMMC requirements, which I think the answer is they already are, but I don't know what NFO means.
Yeah, so let's unpack that just a little bit. So for those who aren't familiar, NFO controls is something that you'll find in Appendix D of NIST 800-171, which, just to correlate, is what CMMC is built off of the back of. Everything that's in 800-171 from a requirements perspective is also copied over into CMMC. But what you don't see explicitly copied over is those NFO controls. Here's why they matter. When NIST was writing 800-171, they were instructed to focus on confidentiality. So when we talk about security, right, we've got our CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They said just focus on a hard C there. So when NIST needed somewhere to put some of the other important items, they backed those off into Appendix D under a series of 50 or so controls that everyone should be doing already sort of before they attempt 800.171. So those were called the non-federal organization controls. Like these we expect to be done pretty much in every American business. Whether that's true or not is a whole different discussion. So when you get into CMMC, it's essentially taking all those controls and saying, hey, these are going to be important for showing your process maturity for things like policy and process. A lot of those NFO controls were oriented around documentation, process, having policies in place. So it's not that CMMC would necessarily go through a control by control reckoning of each of those. But man, I couldn't tell you of a better resource to lean on and draw from than the NFO controls to be able to prove out your process maturity.
All right, NFO. I think we need a sticker. Yeah, that was a good answer, right? I mean, like it follows, essentially it transfers and follows those over.
Yeah, we have to remember, you know, this is America. We don't read appendices.
No.
Well, and the other challenge that we have, and it's you know, kind of the dirty little secret, not such a secret, is that, you know, NIST does these things and they've only got so many hours in the day to do this. So he puts the stake in the ground for something and it exists for years and the technology changes. I'll give you a great example. There's call outs to kind of endpoint control where you're going to be looking at the virus definition file of an endpoint. It's like, well, how many endpoints have virus definition files these days? Not very many, but that still kind of existed and is dragged along with some of the guidance from NIST, just because we haven't gone back and been agile in updating the guidance.
Yeah, and then someone makes a misinformed decision, right, on what they should implement. We're
getting better though. I mean, the good news is we're getting better. So NIST is moving a lot quicker. I think CMMC will force us to move a lot quicker as well because of the evaluators and because there's so much kind of skin in the game for acquisition. Again, it's the carrot and the stick, right? If you can't buy something, then that kind of changes the dynamic a little bit.
No, that's good. Hey, so we're gonna do another poll. The question is, do we do controversial or non-controversial poll first?
Let's rip the Band-Aid off.
All right.
Really?
All right.
You have a non-controversial version, Patrick? I'm surprised.
All right. What concerns you most about the 2020 election launch? Mail-in voting, election hacking, social media influence.
That's a hard right turn, man.
Or in-person voting resulting in COVID-19 outbreaks. Sorry. Kind of joking, kind of not, but hey, we're talking to federal government, so federal government folks. So I thought I'd make it a little bit of fun. So I think you two vote as well?
Yeah, I voted on that one.
Oh man. Right now we're trending. Why'd all these people drop off the call? No, mail-in voting at 25%, election hacking at 25%, social media fake news at 29%. Nobody's worried about in-person voting resulting in COVID-19 outbreaks. Well, other than there's 4 people that said all the above. So yeah, I think, I mean, like the reason why I stated that, like, this question is, it's like, yeah, the whole reason why we're talking about security controls is to limit risk, right? And these are some of the examples of real risk to the government right now. Right?
Yeah, and it's, you know, voting is core to our democracy and the most important thing. So I would say all the above, and I would say that, you know, be vigilant, wear a mask, and vote.
Yeah, and since I can't leave CMMC headspace, you know, I would say that, you know, a topic like that, you can see that being striped across technology issues, logistics issues, human in-person facility issues. You know, those are some of the things that are also tricky about CMMC. Did you like that transition? You know,
well, and I agree with you, because like, you know, even when I was at Duo, the labs team was breaking apart the voting machines and showing how easy it is to switch out some of the parts and magically modify votes, right? So it's not, you're completely right? Like the purpose of CMMC is there is supply chain across the board that influences potentially an election outcome, right?
Yeah,
kudos to Ryan for bringing it all back around. So thanks, Ryan, for doing that.
Yeah, I'm gonna end that poll. We'll share the results for a moment to everybody. Good job.
Yeah, that does highlight, you know, it is supply chain. And again, if we're all interconnected and we're all, you know, kind of using cloud services and we're all using the same technologies, it would behoove us to all kind of pay attention to the same thing. So I think the interconnectivity and the supply chain, and we're all living in the same bubble, all important.
Yeah, I think it gets overlooked. I was talking to another industry, can't name the organization, but let's say a large retailer, right? And it was surprising the attacks happening on their supply chain, resulting in an impact to their business, because when their supply chain or supplier can't actually produce or get things logistically to where they need to be, essentially it affects the bottom line from a money perspective for them, right? So
yeah, there's risk. I mean, you look at kind of where this started, right? There's risk of Chinese manufacturers selling exactly a like piece of equipment as an American manufacturer for 1/10 the price, right?
You mean my webcam that probably has malware on it?
you do, Patrick.
Logitech, I mean, Logitech was out of stock on Amazon, so I bought.
But that's where this kind of started, right? It kind of started with saying, look, government agencies, look, and everyone's got budgets. Everyone's got to, maintain their budgets and look at that. And government is always, least cost technically acceptable solution decisions. It's always the way it works. And I think that there's risk in that if you're looking at budget as the only metric for how you choose technology.
Yeah, I think that from a supply chain perspective, we continue to see CMMC, especially in those GSA solicitations, just paired up with supply chain risk management for cyber. Like they can't be separated out. And so, everybody that's talking about CMMC right now is also talking about the NDAA Section 889, where, you can't use certain Chinese sourced electronics in the defense supply chain anymore. So people are switching out their security cameras all over their facilities because you pop open the service panel on that thing and you can find a Chinese chipset. That people are starting to realize that lowest cost, most technically acceptable option doesn't always address some of those risks. And that's where, I think one of the big unanswered questions right now is how CMMC as an allowable cost will or will not create the extra budget that allows for more security to be baked into the final deliverable.
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is a big unknown.
On that note, right, what are some of the challenges you've seen organizations run into from a CMMC compliance requirements, and are there any like real life examples you can provide on how they address those challenges?
Well, going back to what Sean was talking about just a few seconds ago with, sometimes you have outdated language or outmoded language, being included or very, NIST type glossary things that people aren't used to using in their day-to-day vocabulary. I worked with an organization who, came to me with this whole elaborate strategy on how they were going to instruct all their employees to only keep one web browser tab open at a time. And I'm like, what's driving this? Can you just tell me more? And they said, well, I got this requirement that if I establish a connection, I can't then establish a second connection, locally into another system. I said, here, hold on one second. Go to your VPN client. You see that checkbox that says, allow the local gateway? I'm like, uncheck that box. We're done here. And like, they just about cried because they had taken this very abstract requirement that wasn't saying, hey, this is a split tunneling discussion, and they had gone off down the rabbit hole. So I think that there's a lot of examples like that where the requirements were written to be broadly interpretable, but then that also assumes you have the glossary of terms to do the interpretation, to actually act on it.
Yeah, and I think that this is going to get better over time. But the other challenge, frankly, is that there are no evaluators yet. Right? This is still early days for this whole process. So everyone's trying to figure it out. Everyone's talking, about procurement in anticipation, right? I think I saw something yesterday about DISA is working on a procurement, and it will have CMMC language in the procurement, which is awesome. But that's down the road, right? We're not quite to the point where we're even singing from the same sheet of music yet. We're not to the point where anyone can evaluate us for any of this stuff yet.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is that, a lot of times people use that uncertainty as a tool to procrastinate, right? Like I'll just wait till everything's crystal clear, and that will never happen in the defense contracting space. And so the question is like, where can we reduce the uncertainty and actually take next steps that we have a higher level of confidence in? So I think that understanding the model itself, even if there isn't as much clarity on how assessment or accreditation and certification is going to function, that is something where you can, take that internally and start to apply it to your organization. I would say that some of the informative references that are in the model appendices documents, which some people haven't bothered to download, will give you a lot of source material that you can use to fact check your planned approach against, or maybe even go find some more long-term established resources that have been out for years or decades for those references. So that can be helpful too.
That's a great point. And I point out the fact that I think that this mirrors the FedRAMP journey perfectly, right? So if you look at the way FedRAMP kind of came about, in the beginning, there weren't the evaluators. There was a lot of unknowns about what it was, and it was very cumbersome, and it didn't stop people from deploying cloud services. But what it did is it forced people to kind of, as things were getting codified, to making sure their cloud services were going to be compliant with the way FedRAMP was kind of moving. And I think CMMC is going to be the exact same way. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, and Sean, there's a lot of excellent resources out there for FedRAMP. I mean, just the FedRAMP resources from the federal government give you a lot of great templates and things like that. I think one of the things that's holding us back as an industry right now is everyone's afraid to say, go look at 853 or go look at FedRAMP because they don't want someone to, freak out and say, oh, you're trying to impose this total federal agency controls catalog. That's not how you should use it. You need to jujitsu some of those excellent resources for your own benefit and advantage. So digging into like a very well documented FedRAMP system security plan for your cloud provider and understanding what you inherited out of it, you're literally satisfying requirements just by being willing to read. So, I mean, like taking some of those things off the shelf and making use of them, why reinvent the wheel? Don't be afraid of 853 or its cloud version FedRAMP. It's literally the biggest shopping list you could ever have to pick from.
It's good. I think, one thing on the CMMC side I see is just the fact, and I think this goes along with a lot with compliance in general, is it does drive an awareness of, hey, you should have some controls in place. And a lot of times these organizations don't realize that or have significant gaps, right? And so, yeah, it's an aspect of like, I do think in a lot of organizations, it is a conversation that should be had with leadership teams. And a lot of times like, hey, we just need to check this box. Well, there's a reason why you actually should be checking the box. And I found this a lot, even when we have customers that don't have compliance requirements, where they don't actually realize all the gaps that they have from a security perspective. And they're like, hey, I got an EDR solution in place, I'm good. And it's like, well, do you have two-factor? Do you have a way to do other forms of detection? Do you have a next-gen firewall? I mean, even base level, I'm talking about product controls, right? And then there's a whole aspect of actually applying process to those products in your organization as well. So
yeah, so my views on compliance are kind of a little different. So I view it probably backwards from the way most people view it. The way I view it is it's kind of like studying for a test, right? If you're supposed to read a book for a test, you should read that book. If you read that book, you're going to do well in the test. If you don't read that book, but you do some bullet point items and you actually are thinking about the test before you think about reading the book, you've done it the absolute wrong way. And compliance the exact same way. If you've done all the right things, you'll get all the check boxes and you'll be compliant. But if you're looking at compliance and then coming back and trying to retrofit to your environment, you've done it ass backwards.
Yeah, no, I think it's a combination. You got to do both together, right? I think it's more or less the awareness piece that it can drive in people. We do have some questions which are pretty good. Is the all volunteer consensus driven approach of the CMMC advisory board able to deliver the functions, resources necessary to deliver the vision of CMMC ESP as it's now getting considered by some other government agencies? How could this be improved? Did you get that?
Yeah,
that's a Ryan question.
That was a separated question of like Thomas Jefferson run-on proportions, but I will unpack that as best I can.
That was from our anonymous attendee, so thank you, anonymous.
Yeah. Like no one can speak for the accreditation body or its board unless they're on it. But I would say that even the accreditation body or the board wouldn't look at themselves as the only party who's responsible for rolling this out, making it successful, implementing it. I mean, we're seeing, obviously the entire MOU that exists, the memorandum between the accreditation body itself and the CMMC PMO's office is relevant. That I believe is headed towards a no cost contract to finalize. You see people from the Defense Acquisition University stepping up and talking about how they would educate contract program managers and contracting officers on these topics. You've got supplemental documents that are coming out to help underpin some of these topics. So I don't think it's not to be too cliched, but it's going to take a team effort for all of the stakeholders and parties involved. And I think that ultimately you want to have good oversight. You want to ask hard questions. Some of the stuff that was baked into the NDAA this year for the Government Accountability Office to take a hard look at what this is really going to cost and how hard it's really going to be. Like those are answers that we all need. So I think that overall, when we talk about, to the last part of that question, expanding beyond defense and into federal, or even from federal to commercial, you just have to keep carrying over those lessons learned. There isn't a supply chain in the United States that even just from the recent reminders of COVID isn't thinking about how they protect their supply or their supply chain or maintain a more resilient supply chain. And so every industry out there is looking at this as the litmus test on, could we use this? So we should be very vocal about what lessons we all are learning, and don't wait for the government funded summary report to come out. Get out there, talk to other people in industry, figure out how to deduplicate efforts and cut costs, all that stuff.
Good advice. I got another one, and I'm going to ask anybody asking a question and not use acronyms anymore. Other than CMMC, right?
If you combine technology and government, you cannot not use acronyms. It's just not possible.
I want to make a joke there. What happens when you combine government and Cisco? It's an acronym joke.
At that point, just government.
All right, that's good. Good acronym joke. Why is CMMC not allowing the utilization of POA and Ms for, I don't know what that means, for risk-based scoring, and I know Ryan will, approach rather than 100% compliance? So, more or less, why is it you have to be 100% compliant opposed to a risk-based model?
Yeah. So this becomes the Marcus Aurelius question: what is the thing in its nature, right? So a POA and M, or plan of action and milestones.
We call them poems, by the way.
Yeah. Commonly a poem. Those are generally, when we talk about them in the compliance space and DFARS, people tend to think about my plan of action is for all of my unsatisfied requirements, the things I haven't gotten around to yet. So when we were still in the thou shall stages that Sean mentioned, we were talking about requirements that you hadn't put in place yet, but we're hoping to in the future. Because CMMC is a moment in time that you're certified against. When you see thought leadership say, no poems, what they're really saying there is you can't have any unimplemented requirements. You had to have taken an initial effort to get these in place, and we will then assess whether those are adequate as part of CMMC. People need to be aware of the fact that plans of action are actually a requirement in CMMC, but for different topics. So the CMMC practice for plans would require that we have those in place for things like identified vulnerabilities. So when my vuln scan or a security advisory from a vendor comes back with, you need to fix this, that I develop a plan to do that. Or for other kinds of system deficiencies, like my last security assessment that my team did in-house revealed that we forgot to put multi-factor on these 3 machines. You'd build a plan for that and fix it. So plans of action are absolutely a necessary element of CMMC implementations. It's the nature of what they're trying to address that is what we see talked about a lot in the industry.
And I think
It's
that
kind
this is actually forcing people to think about what their risks are, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the biggest benefits of doing this. And I think it's also why, and Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have different maturity levels, right? So you're not going to say I can hit level 5 right out of the gate. I'm going to actually have to mature to this, and I'm going to have kind of these action reports or action ability documentation to document where my risk is and what my journey is going to look like. It's very similar to what we're doing on the zero trust side of federal with 800-207, where we're kind of forcing agencies to look at what their risk profiles are, and you can make risk-based decisions. If you say that the application ability or availability is more important to have today than this piece of security, to just call that out. But the fact that you know that risk is a step in the right direction.
I think, tying this back as well, and this is going to be my 2-second vendor pitch. The POAM to me, right, is actually one of the things I think, coming from Duo. Essentially, like, two factors are really effective control, and you can get it in place with Duo in a matter of minutes. And so I think there's the aspect of, like, yeah, how can I hit the low hanging fruit? Probably when you're looking at POAMs, is that accurate? And why products like Duo, for example, slot in very, very well in those plans of action.
Yeah, I think people have to be aware of how much technical debt they take on with any new tool they're going to put in place. So obviously, it's great to have those quick wins where with very little time you can get something stood up, and go read a threat report. Almost all realized threats happen because of the abuse of real, like, valid system credentials. So if I could put something like multi-factor in place, like, I'm buying down one of the biggest risks with hopefully some of the least effort. So that's definitely a part of it.
I do think it's been really interesting. Like, I have some family members that are in government. They travel the world. I don't know, I won't disclose what they do, but yeah, essentially they're like, hey, look, we no longer have to use PIV card. Like, since COVID happened, everyone's like, IT transformation done. So yeah, it is kind of interesting to see. Yeah, like, everyone realized it doesn't really take 3 to 5 years to do IT transformation now that COVID exists, right?
No, it's my good friend of mine always says it's the Mike Tyson quote, right? Everyone's got a plan till you get punched in the face, and I think COVID punched people in the face and forced you to modernize much quicker than you were comfortable with. But hey, we're here now, and it's all working.
I think it also reveals the fallacy people operated under, which is that my corporate network is safe. As soon as people move out to working from home, they're like, gosh, we got to do something about data protection or all these other factors. It's like, no, those were already there. you just had a false sense of security.
I think that what, again, bring it back to CMMC, I think that these maturity models kind of help us with the basic hygiene, right? They force us to kind of think about, what are the basic hygiene pieces? Where do I start my journey, right? It's a journey of multiple steps. And if I can do the basic part well, then I can start working on the more complex situations. And you're exactly right. It's all really about the data. If you figure out that my users can be anywhere, my applications can be anywhere, what are you really protecting? You're protecting the user's access to the data.
Yeah.
And what's typically on the CMMC side, right? What do you guys see as the low hanging fruit? And what are the more common gaps that people have challenges with?
So
throwing a curveball out there.
Well, this is where I think some of the hot takes can come into play. So I think one of the biggest difficulties that I see businesses facing is understanding the requirement to use FIPS validated encryption. Again, this is all acronyms and lingo, right? So people see FIPS 140-2 in a sentence somewhere and they think they're okay. Well, it turns out that you're only FIPS 140-2 compliant, not validated. So does your firewall vendor actually ship their firewalls to NIST and have them tested in a lab and validated? Or are you just using good encryption algorithms that are certified by NIST? That's a difference maker in the CMMC space. And so it's like those little bureaucratic technical requirements that are easy to misinterpret and really hard to put into practice. And so those are some of those areas where we see a lot of organizations struggle.
Yeah, and I think, and Ryan, or Patrick, you probably remember this from your Duo days when we went through FedRAMP, right? I mean, we had a lot of conversation around FIPS specifically because you can use FIPS compliant algorithms, but not use them in the right way. Therefore, you are not FIPS compliant. So we have many conversations about, no, you can't turn those things on. You can't turn on SHA-1. That's not going to work. I mean, technically, it's a FIPS. Yeah, it kind of is, but yeah, that as far as implementation, that doesn't meet the high bar.
No, and I think, I think that was one interesting thing in building Duo and going towards that. It's later on in a product life cycle where you can start looking at FedRAMP because of the cost and the work associated with it. I think at Duo, right, it was like 2 years and tens of millions of dollars probably, right? But
yeah, I always tell people that we were 2 years into a 6-month process.
Exactly. Yeah, right. that's about right, right? And so yeah, I think it's the aspect of like even prior to that though, like Duo proved out a lot of compensating controls to show that they actually could deliver for the most part what was required, and so doing that was in a lot of cases good enough, knowing there was a plan to actually execute on the FedRAMP side. So it was a lot of fun working through that. And then we all got these shirts when we actually got FedRAMP certified.
And I was going to wear mine, but I didn't want to be Husby twins and have Ryan left out by not having the Duo Federal shirt.
Oh,
so
you knew I was going to wear it?
No, you posted on LinkedIn and I saw you and I had mine. I was going to wear it. And I was like, oh, I can't wear it now because we're going to be twins.
There you go. Well, speaking of FedRAMP, I think that's also one of the areas where it can be a bit of a surprise or catch people off guard. We're talking about CMMC, right? And we all know that CMMC looks like it could be headed outside of the defense contracting space. But for today, looking at the defense industrial base itself, we've got all of our DFARS clauses to stack on top of this too. So if somebody's picking up CMMC and they've never read DFARS 252, 204, 7012, they won't realize that any cloud services that they use need to have security equivalent to the FedRAMP moderate baseline, and that those cloud providers have to also agree to play ball on DoD damage assessments for incidents. That really narrows the field of cloud options. So we see a lot of organizations who have made earnest efforts to implement CMMC using vendor tools that don't meet their DFARS obligations. So now where do you go from there?
Yeah, and in that case, do people end up ripping out their tool sets and putting something in, or they accept?
It's all over the place. So I think one of the other things that can sometimes bail you out of those situations, but that everyone should be doing to start, is get a working definition of what controlled unclassified information actually is for your business. And there's a fighting chance that not every one of your business processes or line of business applications or departments or facilities actually handles that kind of data. So if you can limit the scope of where you need to do something like CMMC level 3, sure, maybe you do CMMC level 1 across the whole business, but level 3 for those limited business processes and applications and IT systems, that could be, the thing that saves you in this situation, that limited scope.
And I think it's also kind of incumbent upon us, as we've gone through FedRAMP and obviously, Patrick, you and two did a really good job of going through CMMC and kind of saying where Blumira helped with the controls. It's incumbent on us vendors to provide that guidance, right? So we're the ones that take apart 171. We're the ones that are going to figure out how this maps to our FedRAMP offering. So we're going to provide a lot of that connective tissue for agencies as they start to roll forward with this. Because right now we're all in this together. There's a lot of unknowns and it's really early days. So we're just starting out.
Yep. No, exactly. And I think providing things that are easy, accessible, informational, right, and how it can help. I did launch a poll as far as like what timeline people had on implementing CMMC standards. Nobody's in the next 30 days are completed so far. So hey, you're not alone, everybody. Yeah, it looks like most people are looking at a further timeline horizon of in the next year, more or less 3 to 12 months. And yeah, what even outside of federal government, right? When we talk about these compliance frameworks, like normally it's a much longer tail than when everything goes into place, right? I know we experienced that at Duo when we went through NYDFS, right? It was mandated, I think, in January of some year, and nobody had even considered touching it until probably March. So that's always one of the things to consider when we're talking about compliance. Not encouraged, but the harsh reality, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that organizations need to consider is, within your particular contracting ecosystem for your industry, based on what you know about your competitors, things like that, what is the upside that you're planning for something like CMMC? So if you don't have a strategy to get ROI or to expand your market footprint as a result of CMMC, you're doing it wrong. So, this isn't a situation where you need to be the first company in the country, CMMC certified, because there might not be any contracts asking for it in your space. You want to, the old adage with, two people running from a bear, you don't need to outrun the bear, you just need to outrun the other guy. And you just want to prepare yourself for, if there's that situation where CMMC does find its way into your space and you have that cert in time, that could buy you, 12 to 18 months of sole supplier status. I mean, that's an impossibly good market upside or outcome from something like this.
And I think that if you were already paying attention to 171, which has been out for a while and already kind of doing those things, you'll be in good shape when you hit this. I think that the challenge is going to be for folks who weren't doing that. And again, why we kind of codified this into a certification, then you're going to have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, people need to understand the DoD's perspective on that, right? I mean, you see all these people saying, how are we going to absorb these costs for things like multi-factor or encryption or, separation of duties? And DoD is going to look at you and say, you mean the things you self-attested that you were putting in place as early as 2014? Like, like that's not a great position to be in from bargaining and saying, this is going to cost too much. You've been taking those purchase orders and those contracts for years now, saying that you've at a minimum implemented and are working towards it. And so, those are costs that you should have been incurring and absorbing over the last several years. So it's tough to get a windfall of funding or assistance on that.
Yep. Hey, so that's understandable. So real quick, we have a few minutes left, right? I think it's worth taking some time to just go around. Ryan, maybe you want to give a quick overview on what you do as far as how with DefCert and your consulting practice, right? And then Sean, maybe talk a little bit about Duo and Cisco and how you're helping customers in the CMMC space. Is that fair? You get to do a product pitch on yourself.
My goodness, that works for me.
So Ryan, you wanna give us an overview how
Sure,
people engage you?
Yeah, this won't take long. So for the most part, I work in conjunction with a lot of other programs. So like with the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership programs in several states. And also, occasionally working through some DoD OEA grant funded programs, working with a lot of managed IT service providers to help their customers, so I'm coming in for a different end client than the MSP itself. So for me, a lot of what I'm doing is focusing, especially in manufacturing, helping organizations to identify that CUI and come up with better ways to manage it. And then only once that is done to move on to the technical discussions and how to implement and things like that. So, I don't really have a sales pitch. I'm very fortunate to be partnered with a lot of organizations like NIST MEP and like DoD OEA. So my dance card stays pretty full as a result of that. So I'll give the remaining time to Sean because he's probably got more to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not going to give much of a pitch, but what I will say is that, Duo and now being part of Cisco, the Department of Defense and their contractors is probably one of our biggest customers. And we all care deeply about the mission and making sure that the mission is successful and secure. I actually will give a shout out to Andy Stewart on our team, who has really done a phenomenal job of kind of mapping some of the Cisco capabilities to CMMC. And again, he's been paying attention to 171 longer than most folks, other than maybe Ryan. So he's done a really good job of kind of providing that kind of context and mapping. And then Ezra Graziano on the Duo side has been kind of the Duo subject matter expert, kind of bringing the Duo expertise in to work with Andy. So they're kind of the Batman and Robin of the CMMC capability matrix within Cisco. And again, it's something we care deeply about. So all the way from multi-factor authentication to endpoint to obviously network security, so any connect and VPN, all the way up through kind of our DNS-based security with Umbrella. We're looking at CMMC across the board.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, one thing I would say on the Duo side is I think it's incredible, especially with the IT transformation side and remote work, a lot of people overlook that, like, it's not just multi-factor, it's also the whole device trust piece, right?
Yep.
And attestation of connectivity. So something to take a look at if you're using Duo or you're familiar with Duo on how they can help in that area as well. That excites me, that a lot of times gets overlooked. And then yes, into that whole Cisco stack. So sounds like you're having fun.
Always.
On my side, just real quick, similar, which is there is a whole amount of, similar to Duo from a control perspective. You look at access. What we're really focused on at Blumira is detection and response. So essentially being able to surface threats within a customer's environment quickly, not requiring a high level SOC security expertise, right? In order to be able to do that, plugs into your existing stack and surfaces threats, right? So really simple from a value prop. It's meant to get up and running in a matter of hours, right? That's some of the key stuff when we're talking about being able to address security and compliance needs quick and fast. And then, yeah, is there anything else you guys want to comment on regarding CMMC? I really appreciate you guys joining, and I can mention a few of the other series we have coming up. But yeah, any advice for those on the call today, or any other questions out there that people have?
I'll give Ryan the last word. The only thing I want to say is that realize this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to be a long journey. It's going to be a large investment, and you're going to look for partners who kind of can help you on that journey.
Yeah, and I think that, we're talking about a maturity model here. And when we think about like ourselves and our own maturity, that comes through time and experience. And so if we're going to accelerate maturity at an organizational level, like, you have to be willing to and able to share your experiences with colleagues, with other stakeholders, write things down, institutionalize both the knowledge and the process, so that there's a better rate of maturity and maturation through the entire organization. And I think that also needs to happen in the market. So, both of you work for technology providers. One of the biggest challenges I face right now is that organizations who are trying to find CMMC oriented products or DFARS compliant options, they end up getting put in touch with the federal sales team, and they haven't had a lot of small business conversations in the past. They're used to talking with agencies. So organizations who are small business oriented, technology providers, need to get more skilled up on federal topics, and the federal providers need to be more skilled up and aware of small business needs.
Cool, that's great. We have one last question, and then I'll close it out and wrap it up. Thank you so much, Sean and Ryan, for joining. It's been fun. I am concerned at what seems a very slow process to get any assessors in place. That will not be ready for a contract potentially. Do you think the timelines will delay?
So Sean, I don't know if you wanted to tackle that one at all, but again, going back to outrunning the bear, we only need as many assessors as there are contract opportunities that specify CMMC. We also only need as many assessors as there are entities or assessing organizations who can understand your specific context and situation. So I'm not saying we don't need a lot of assessors. We need thousands and thousands of them over the next several years. But hopefully there is dialogue between DoD contracting officers and the individuals, training the assessors, so that we're not out kicking our coverage on that. The hope there is that can be a scaled approach, and that we maybe don't need a lot of assessors right this second while we're talking about things like pilot contracts, but that we can continue to get enough people trained and in place. Again, I don't have any insight into that process, but hopefully everybody's in dialogue on that and making that happen in a feasible way.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, again, I'll just kind of point out the fact that let the 3PO situation with FedRAMP be your guide, right? In the beginning, there was a lot of pent up demand. There were a lot of things that had to go through the assessment process. It took time, but now I would say here we are in 2020 and it's a well-oiled machine. So just give it time.
Did you say 3CPO?
C3PAO. Yeah, there's definitely a Star Wars fan inside of the CPMO's office.
Oh, that's hilarious. Hey, so thanks for joining. Next week we have a discussion on balancing compliance and security with Jamie Tomasello, who you might know, Sean.
I do. I'm a big Jamie fan. I will tune in for that one. Absolutely.
Go Jamie, former head of compliance and trust. She's taken off the whole summer. I'm jealous. Like, what a year to take off of work. That's gotta be nice. She's awesome. She's done some videos with us. We've had a lot of fun, but has a really realistic view on the balance of compliance and security. And then Amanda Berlin, who's on the Blumira team, regarding incident and detection and response, has done a ton of mapping regarding our product to different compliance frameworks. So, hey, thank you for taking your time Thursday afternoon to hang out and chat about CMMC. I appreciate you two hopping on, and yeah, have a great day.
Thanks for having
me, Patrick. Thanks, Ryan.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, absolutely.
Hit that stop record button. Stop recording. Thanks, everybody. Later. That was good. Thanks for. Oh wait, and we're live on YouTube. How do you stop?